And welcome to First Strike here on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross. For the next hour, we're going to break down UFC 297. Yes, the first pay-per-view of the calendar year is upon us. Not one, but two title bouts on this one. Raquel Pennington against Mayra Bueno Silva, and then Sean Strickland, a bit of a grudge match against Dricus Du Plessis. We'll get to all of that with our roll call of stars today. We got Lou Finocchiaro, Dan Vreeland, Nick Kalikas, and Reed Kuhn in the program today. I want to look back to what we saw last week, UFC Fight Night, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, they don't get a lot better than what we saw from Magomed Ankalaev, against Johnny Walker last week, taking him out in round number 2. Rather impressive fashion. Remember, this was a rematch of sorts from the no contest in Abu Dhabi. It was no contest this time around as Ankalaev gets Johnny Walker out of there late in round 2. But without further ado, let's get back to this card because it is a good one. Let's bring in the man you can follow on X as I do, at Gamblou. He's the host of the About Business podcast, the one, the only Lou Finocchiaro. Lou, it's the first big one of 2024 with those two title bouts on there. I know we don't necessarily handicap things any differently just because it's a pay-per-view card, but let's get to the main event here because I mentioned with Dricus Du Plessis and Sean Strickland, there's a lot of bad blood between these two. The number is moved to Strickland's favor here, up to $1.42. You could have gotten closer to about minus $1.05 a couple weeks ago. Dricus right now plus 120 in the comeback. What do you make when there's emotions attached to it and it feels like there's some genuine bad blood between these two?
Well, first of all, Dave, thank you so much for having me on. This fight opened right at the price that the screen is showing right now. I track Bet Online. I don't mean to mention someone else, but they come out early and they take real wagers. And so at 145 is where this open came down with some Du Plessis money. Now I see it's come back to Strickland a little bit. And boy, did you hit it with the one word in the intro there, emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Du Plessis went, I think, to places far, far beyond what other fighters have recently gone in their trash talking, and it clearly affected Strickland. When I look at this fight, I see a guy in Du Plessis that maybe I have failed to give him his proper respect up till now. I see a guy that's committed. I see a guy that has profuse power. He comes forward at all costs. But I think that if there's a chink in his armor, it's the fact that he's so big, he can get all swole up in a fight and start to wane later. Now, we know Strickland can fight for 15 rounds without a problem and would have no problem doing so. Strickland having Eric Nixick in his corner is a plus, but it's the emotion with Strickland. And some months ago, maybe even a year or so ago, and we talked about Strickland coming off his fight against Alex Pereira, we worried about his IQ. And so you have a guy that's a plodding forward power striker in Du Plessis against a guy that in Strickland who I see this fight a lot like Cannonier, except Du Plessis maybe is not as explosive, powerful, and doesn't have Cannonier's gas. So if I knew that Strickland was going to be able to monitor and corral his emotions, I would lean to him. But I think this fight is relatively accurately priced. It's a difficult one. And if anything, I haven't seen totals yet.
We got him out. Yeah, and Luke, that's what I wanted to bring up to you, because when I think of a Sean Strickland fight in a correlated fight, right? Now, he almost got Israel Adesanya out of there in the first round, didn't, and then kind of carried him to an easy decision victory to gain the strap. The total here is juiced heavily to the over, but it's only a round and a half, 7.5 minutes here at minus 225. Again, I don't think of Strickland in the finishing regards. Yes, he can, and he's gotten other people out of there relatively quickly. When you think of Du Plessis, that's what you think of, right? The cardio is always in question, that he's going to go out there full bore, try to get this done sooner than later. It almost feels correlated that if you like the underdog here in Dricus, you would play the under, and if you liked Strickland, you might play the over. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I think so. I think the underdog is Strickland. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to win this fight. I think Strickland has a chance to w I'm not sure, but I would have to agree, especially since this opened 3.5 with an under a -115.
Right.
So from 3.5 now it gets shoved to 1.5. Now we know Strickland can wrestle and grapple. He never uses it. So could Dricus run into one? Maybe, but I have to agree with you, Dave. I think at 1.5, it paints the picture like maybe Dricus here via finish, and that has me maybe a little cautious. That said, I'm not always afraid, and so if I think that it's going to be Strickland and or an over, I surely won't hesitate, especially with that 1.5.
This one is in Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, north of the border for this main event and this entire card. Obviously, does that change the equation at all? Because we don't have, this isn't like George St. Pierre fighting in front of his countrymen and women. When you've got a South African, you got an American. There's not. Is there going to be a rooting interest? Do you think for the crowd one way or the other? Does that factor in?
Yeah, and I don't think so. But let's understand this is only one of 3 fights not featuring one Canadian.
Right.
So the Canadians are populated all through the fight card. They're favorites in all but 2. They're going to make us do our work on this one, Dave.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? We can't get that home cooking for this one here. Let's get to the other title bout on this one in the Bantamweight division, and this feels like now finally Dana White and the UFC starting to pick up the pieces for Amanda Nunes now that she is gone, vacated at 35 and 45. So here at Bantamweight, you get Raquel Pennington against Mayra Bueno Silva here for the belt. And Silva right now is the betting favorite at -1.62. Again, you know who Raquel Pennington is. This is not a mystery what she wants to do. She wants to box. She wants to stand and trade. She'd like to make this ugly on the feet. I'm assuming Bueno Silva doesn't necessarily, probably doesn't want to fight her at that range, and maybe wants to get to the inside and maybe down to the ground. How do you see this, and do you think Bueno Silva should be as big a favorite as she is right now at $1.62?
I think Bueno Silva is the beneficiary of some recency in that fight with Holm.
Yeah.
Now she got popped for a drug that I don't think she should have got popped for. I don't really see that as an issue. It was Adderall. She takes that, so maybe better communication with the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly here, I think I like the fact that Pennington trains at altitude. I like the fact she's been off a little bit. I like her wrestling chops. I think she's a worthy dog.
4.5 is the total for this potential 5-round championship fight here. Juiced to the over there. So if you think the fight just hits the cards, you can get that at $1.05. Does that interest you at all?
If it interests me, it interests me only in that I would take Pennington perhaps via decision. I'm not certain if I love that.
Yeah.
Because I think Bueno Silva, the way she fights, is highly emotional, highly taxing physically, and she could run out of juice in a 5-rounder.
Yes.
Now she hasn't before, but she's in against a wrestler that's going to be unrelenting in forward pressure.
Yeah, you're right. So with Strickland in the main event, cardio is not going to be an issue here for Raquel Pennington going forward. You mentioned the Canadians. They got one in Mike Malott. They love him a lot north of the border. Why do we do this to Neil Magny? We throw him in there with some of the very best around. Neil, of course, almost a $3 betting underdog. On Mikey, the comeback there is -345 here for the big fave. Any fighting chance for old man Neil? And again, Neil doesn't shy away. The UFC just throws him killer after killer.
I think that it's possible that Magny is really the handicappers here may not be giving Magny the credit for who he's been in with. A much more stringent level of competition than Malott has faced. Now, this is a huge step up for Malott. He's fighting in Toronto, where he's from. Yeah, the fans are going to be for him, but he's got ticket requests, pressure, everything else. And I would really build the case for Neil Magny, I think, except that Malott's victories, 60%, have come via the submission, and 55% of Magny's losses have been via decision. This may be a fight I have to step away from, or perhaps maybe take a look at that total. Again, total opened 2.5 -115 to the over. Now it's like 210 to the over. So Gary couldn't get Neal out of there. I'm not certain if Malott will.
Wow, over right now. If you think Magny could drag this one out there, just to hit the cards, plus $1.95 without picking a winner. Only 90 seconds to go. Is there any other fight? And I know you've got the sneak teep out there you're going to give out too that you really like. And again, it's, as you mentioned, littered with Canadians here, and they're favored in most of these fights here in the undercard and the main card.
Yes, thank you, Dave. The fight between Johan Linnes and Sam Patterson. Sam Patterson from England, long, tall, drink of water. And he got in his last fight overconfident against a little powder keg in Ashmouz and got KO'd. And I think here, Linnes, a Canadian fighting in Canada, he's been off since February or March. He's lost to Malott, switched to TriStar. I think Linnes has a lot to offer here, and he'll be a fighter that we will be using this week for sure.
Okay, minus $1.48 right now on Linnes against Patterson. Again, tell them about the Pout Business Podcast. We've got about 20 seconds. It's fantastic. It's quick. It's every Friday.
It's 15 minutes. Final releases. Get it at gamblu.com. And Dave, thanks so much, and good luck to everybody at the fight.
Lou, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much. Cannot wait to see these fights kick off north of the border. When we come back, we'll get close to the border. We'll go to Boston. Is that close to Canada? Yeah, I think it is. Dan Vreeland next year on First Strike. If you're looking for a betting edge through the NFL playoffs and the Super Bowl, well, the VSiN experts have got you covered. Become a VSiN Pro subscriber today. Get access to our daily best bets with a leaderboard to see which VSiN expert has a current hot hand. Betting Split's going to show you where the money and the bets are moving for every single game, plus betting systems, premium analysis, 24/7 video access. Sign up today. Get your first 30 days for only $9.99 to see everything VSiN has to help up your betting game. Visit VSiN.com/subscribe and sign up now. We ship up to Boston to catch up with our guy, Dan Vreeland. You can follow him on X, as I do, at Gumby Vreeland. Dan, you know me well enough by now. I'm not great with geography. If you got in your car how long would it take you to get to Scotiabank in Toronto?
I think like 6 hours. I have driven to Toronto for a Blue Jays game before on a whim, so it's not terribly long.
So you're close to the border?
Yeah, close enough.
We do have 2 title bouts that we'll get to, but I like to ask you about the undercards too. And let me start there. And of course, the question we love to ask you, the fight that you can't wait to watch and the fight you can't wait to wager on. I'm assuming there's going to be a Canadian involved somewhere.
Yeah, so the fight I can't wait to watch has got to be Charles Jourdain versus Sean Woodson. It's a matchup between two guys who are incredibly impressive on the feet. Jourdain's got a little bit of grappling skills that we've seen. Actually, we've seen a little bit out of Woodson, too. I'm not sure that I love the line on Charles Jourdain at -190, although I do favor him slightly. I don't necessarily think there's tons of value there. There's probably some interesting value on either guy by submission, seeing as both of them have kind of hit him, but we generally think of him as a striker.
Yeah.
So that's a really fun fight to watch and to just keep an eye on. The fight I can't wait to wager on, I think, is painfully obvious, and the numbers have been going crazy over the last couple of days, and that's Malcolm Gordon over Jimmy Flick. Like, why is Jimmy Flick not a 2 or 3 to 1 underdog against anybody in this flyweight division? Never mind Malcolm Gordon, who, let's face it, has some pretty good wrestling. I know we're talking about a guy with maybe not the best looking record in the UFC, but when he fought Muhammad Mokaev, he actually had Mokaev's back for a little while, threatened him with some submissions. And he's got good takedown defense. So if he keeps it on the feet against Jimmy Flick, I think he should batter him. And seeing him at, only like -160. I think I saw -166 this morning. It was -130 earlier in the week. Seeing him anywhere south of -200 is just an easy spot in my estimation, because I think he keeps it standing, and I think he beats the hell out of him.
That's the first fight of the day. So probably get on that side of Gordon now at -1.66, as you mentioned. Before that thing gets a little bit north of that, because I got to think as to your point, Dan, the numbers going up. I don't think it's going to come back down here anytime soon. The second fight on the card is interesting. Jasmine Jasudavicius against Priscilla Cachoeira. Cachoeira, big dog in this one. Jazzy J's kind of been starting to make her move in the flyweight division here. She's almost a $4 betting favorite against Cachoeira. Is that too big a price, or do you think it's deserved?
I think that's right around where it should be. We've seen Cachoeira sort of have issues with the takedown defense. And in Jasudavicius's last couple of fights, she's really put a lot of work in the clinch and a lot of work into finishing those takedowns. She looked amazing against Miranda Maverick, who is not an easy person to dominate in a physical sense. So Jasudavicius seems to be putting it all together. I would probably place her right around a 4-1 favorite. That seems to make sense. Obviously, that kind of chalk, maybe not enticing to a lot of people. So I think the real play here is we're going to look a little bit closer to fight time, look for that decision prop because, despite the fact that I love Jasudavicius and we've seen her, look like she could get people out of there on the regional scene, it's just kind of not her style since she's been here. She's very happy being in good positions and doing damage without looking for the big blow or, without being too risky and top control. So I like Jasudavicius by decision here to make it maybe a little sweeter.
You look at Jillian Robertson against Polyana Viana, and right now Jillian's about minus 250. I'm seeing here Viana, the comeback there, over $2 as a betting underdog there in the strawweight division. What do you make of Jillian in the big favorites role? I like to get her sometimes when she's a dog, and now she's flipped to a big fave. Is it too big?
I think it's a little bit too big, and I know, similar to what we were just talking about with Cachoeira, Polyana Viana has had some issues with her grappling defense as well. The difference for me here is that Jillian Robertson is not much of a wrestler. We've seen in her last couple of fights, kind of the limit to her is whether or not she can get you down. Because on the feet, she's not better than Polyana Viana. Viana's much faster. She fights longer. She's going to be quicker. She's going to be stronger in the clinch. She's going to throw knees to the body. Whereas Robertson, generally her striking is a means to an end. What she's trying to do is get close enough to you so that she can hit those takedowns. Because when she's on top, she's one of the best grapplers in the division. You have to give her that. The problem is she just doesn't get a chance to grapple enough. And, I think we've seen with Viana up against some people who probably wrestle a little bit better than Robertson. We've actually seen her stuff some of those takedowns and sort of work through that. And, the knockout power is there for Viana, which is also kind of worrisome when you're talking about Jillian Robertson, somebody whose striking defense is not held up particularly well in the past. I really think the dog money here on Viana makes a lot of sense, especially as this kind of ballooned out of control here. Because earlier in the week, we saw Robertson, she was down in the negative 100s. Mm-hmm. Seeing her come up to negative 2.5 here, I think it's just way too high against somebody like Polyana Viana, who's dangerous on the feet.
Brad Katona, we've seen him now. It feels like he's always in the Ultimate Fighter, and now he's out again, taking on Garrett Armfield. We saw Armfield kind of make a short-term replacement, come into the UFC and look okay, right? Getting in there, and now Katona's almost a $2 betting favorite against Armfield. Is there danger here for Brad in a fight that he's now quote unquote supposed to win easily?
Absolutely, there's danger in this fight. Garrett Armfield is a phenomenal wrestler. I'm really, really, really high on him coming off the regional scene. Obviously, like you said, coming in on short notice, you never quite look like you're supposed to. Mm-hmm. I mean, we remember Benoit Saint Denis stepping in on short notice and just taking an absolute battering. And now 6 fights later, he's fighting Dustin Poirier. So, Garrett Armfield, I think we're kind of underrating him here a little bit. And let's face it, Katona didn't look like a world beater on that season of The Ultimate Fighter. He had a lot of trouble with Timur Valiev, who the UFC didn't even find inclined to sign. Then he had some trouble with Cody Gibson in the finale. I think the fact that now he has to worry about defensively wrestling in a fight up against a guy who, I think can throw some hands with him too, I think it's going to be problems for him. So, I like Garrett Armfield here, especially as, again, this is another one of those people who started off as a small favorite, seems to be ballooning larger and larger as the week goes. I'll take the dog money here on Garrett Armfield. I think that wrestling gets going. Yeah,
I'm picking up what you're putting down with that fight. I am fascinated by the numbers and what we might see with Arnold Allen against Movsar Evloev. And Evloev right now is almost a $2 betting favorite against Allen. It's like, boy, you lose once and then people forget who you are in Arnold Allen. Is he too big a dog now at plus $1.64?
I think he is too big of a dog, but unfortunately, I think this is one of those fights where we're going to know exactly how the fight looks like 30 seconds in. And unfortunately, that's 30 seconds after your bet lock. So with Arnold Allen, to your point, he lost to Max Holloway. Can we write him off for losing to Max Holloway? No. And he's probably one of the better strikers in the division.
Mm-hmm.
And his wrestling defense has held up historically. Like if you go back to all of his fights, the wrestling's held up. The problem is he's fought nobody like Movsar Evloev. Like he has stuffed the takedowns of, Sadiq Youssef, let's say. And Sadiq Youssef, maybe he's got a couple of takedowns in the chamber, but largely that guy wants to strike with you as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, for his takedown defense to hold up against somebody who doesn't particularly love to shoot takedowns, I'm not quite sure what that says about him. Now we're going to see him fight Evloev, who we know is going to spam takedowns. The dude's probably going to shoot 9 or 10 of them. And the question is, can he land 9 or 10 of them on Arnold Allen? And we might have that answer in 30 seconds into the fight. I tend to think Arnold Allen's takedown defense is going to be enough to hold up. What he did against Nick Lentz, which granted, Nick Lentz, again, not Movsar Evloev, but I think what he did against Nick Lentz shows me enough that I think he can at least get back up, push the pace, kind of put Evloev in a bad spot. Plus, obviously, Evloev's performance against Diego Lopes did not age well. I mean, I guess it aged well. Diego Lopes looked good, but like the guy's on short notice and you couldn't really take him down and control him and arguably maybe lost that fight. I think Arnold Allen's striking's way better as long as he can keep the feet here. The dog money makes sense. But again, I think this is one of those fights that a minute in, you might be slapping yourself for making either side of the play.
90 seconds to go. Let's get to the main event here. Strickland against Du Plessis. We know there's a lot of bad blood here. I'm a little bit surprised that the total is set at 1.5. It is juiced heavily to the over for 7.5 minutes here. But is this correlated play? If you like Sean, you like the over. And if you like Du Plessis as a dog, you think he gets it done quicker than later?
I actually think even if you like Du Plessis, you can go with the over here. I think even though he is a guy who does start quick and goes for those big knockout blows, and let's face it, Sean Strickland's actually been knocked out a couple of times in his career, which, gives us question about his chin. But I do think that with Du Plessis, he is a guy who's worried about his cardio in the past. So you might see him pump the brakes a little bit early on, try to find that range. And I think the over makes a lot of sense here. I will also say I love Du Plessis. I think he can mimic a lot of the game plan here that Jared Cannonier did, where maybe he doesn't have to match the volume, but the bigger strikes are going to be the ones the judges remember. And that cost Sean Strickland a fight just 4 fights ago. So, let's look at Du Plessis to maybe do something like that and do it in a slower fashion.
You talk about Sean Strickland getting knocked out. My ticket's still burning from hands down against Alex Pereira. I'll never forget that. Put your hands up, Sean. Dan, appreciate you, man. Cash some tickets. We'll catch up again soon. There he is, everybody. Dan Vreeland in Boston. When we come back, Nick Kalikas is going to join us, the man that normally sets these type of numbers. We'll get his thoughts as to which numbers are good numbers still to play. That's next right here on First Strike. Before you make your next bet, be sure to visit VSiN.com. Check the current betting splits data. Want to know where the money and the bets are moving for every single NFL? Well, all those bowl games, they're over, but the Super Bowl is coming up, and the betting splits page is updated with DraftKings odds every 5 minutes. You can see the changes in all the action. Find out where the public is betting based on the number of tickets and where the money doesn't match the public opinion. We're always improving our betting splits and recently added soccer betting splits from around the world. Betting splits are another way VSiN is here to make you a smarter, better year-round. And yes, we also have UFC fight splits. So check out today's betting splits for every game at VSiN.com/splits. It's now time to catch up with a guy that I have great reverence for here in this industry. He is the one and only Nick Kalikas. Follow him on X as I do, at Fight Odds. One of the originators when we started this show a couple years ago. And he is now the originator and founder of MMA Oddsbreaker. Nick, great to have you back in the program. Tell the people about MMA Oddsbreaker and where they can find it and how they access it.
Sure, man. Always a pleasure to be on with you guys for sure. MMAOddsbreaker.com has been around for a long time. We have a lot of good betting information, a lot of cool shows. Recently, with the help of actually a good friend of yours, Reed Kuhn, as well, and Nate Latshaw, we launched a really cool tail of the tape type of function. It's a customized tail of the tape. So there's a lot of cool stuff that helps your betting needs. So head over to MMAOddsBreaker.com. We got you covered.
Yeah, it's excellent. We're going to have Reed on right after you, Nick, today. So some of the best minds in the business continuing the excellency of this show here. Let's get to the main event, because you look at the Sean Strickland line against Dricus Du Plessis, and it kind of has yo-yoed back and forth here. Open Strickland came all the way down. Almost, I saw some even monies out there, and now Strickland back up to being about $1.42 fave here. Is that number set appropriately, Nick? And do you think you're going to see more fluctuation before we get to fight night Saturday in Toronto?
Let me say this. I think it's fair. I mean, look, Strickland, from what he's done as of late, that win over Izzy especially, I mean, he's been nothing but impressive. You know he's fighting for your money. And he's just a quality, underrated fighter. He has been for a long time. So he's worthy of holding that strap. I mean, that's how good this guy is. Now, the other side of it, though, I think Du Plessis has been underrated as well. He was a big dog to Whitaker. He just destroyed him. He ran through Whitaker and ended up getting in this spot here. But not just that. If you look at Du Plessis' fights as a whole, I understand there's a lot of maybe sloppy aggression that people might not like. And they kind of tend to frown on that a little bit, meaning that they're impacting the betting line, they're impacting everything based on his kind of aggression and what you see, defensive flaws and all that. But make no mistake, man, this guy's getting it done. He's finishing great competition along the way. So this is an intriguing battle. You're going to see two-way sharp action, but the narrative more so on this one is Strickland, as it progresses, if he can weather that early storm, probably gets it done. That's why most people are betting Strickland up.
And that's the interesting thing, because styles make fights. And we know that Sean Strickland, I'm not saying we're doubting the IQ, but sometimes, like if you go to the Alex Pereira fight, right, like hands down in front of Izzy, in front of Pereira is not a good recipe, right? If he gets into a brawl with Du Plessis in the first 5, that's where the danger lies. Because look, he almost got Izzy out of there in the first round, so maybe he's overconfident that I can go ahead and get some of these bigger strikers out. Is that a concern if you're on the Strickland side, that he does in the first 5 minutes say, all right, let's see what you got, Dricus, and let's see how bad you actually are?
Especially with all the bad blood, like leading up to this fight, he has to. If Strickland's going to fight smart, you know what, his coach is training, the team over at Extreme Couture are doing a phenomenal job with him, so he's going to be prepared, hopefully mentally as well, to kind of settle down and not kind of fall into that trap. But you never know. I worry, and that is a concern for me as well. Strickland's fight IQ, like you said, the Pereira fight, man. What was he thinking sometimes? So, but beyond that, you got to give him credit where credit's due. This guy's tough as nails, and he just brings the fight to you. So, yeah, I think if he gets in a firefight early on, it might not end up very well for him. He has to be a little bit more patient, kind of like I said, weather that storm if he's going to have success. Du Plessis is a beast, man. This guy's legit, and another guy worthy of holding the title, honestly.
You know, it's interesting when we look at Du Plessis on his side, because I think the Robert Whitaker fight was an eye-opener for many, because there still are cardio issues with Dricus. Now, he did have nasal passage surgery, so it's almost scary to think the guy couldn't breathe in there for the majority of his octagon days. If that's really cured now, if that really is all that was ailing him, should we still have the same cardio concerns that we've had in the past?
Until we see otherwise, yes. I mean, it's just hard not to. I mean, it's just, for fighters in general, that's one of the most difficult things, I think. And you can condition yourself all you want. Some people just can't get that cardio where it needs to be. So, yeah, from all the signs that we've seen, you got to kind of believe what you've even with the surgery, even with, maybe the improvements, I still think that you have to question that more than anything else. But, man, this guy, I have nothing but respect for him as well, because he'll go into the round 3 fighting tired, looking like a sloppy mess at times, but he's still so effective. He can finish the fight. So this guy is one of those guys that I think you could see him kind of wearing down, but he's still going to bring it. So I'm curious to see if this floats into round 4 or round 5, how he's going to look and how it's going to be. This fight, there's so many different ways it can play out. I'm really interested. This is probably one of the main events I've been looking forward to the most.
Yeah, I tried to go running once and just breathe through my nose for 3 minutes, almost passed out. So it's not as easy as you think it is, people out there, when you're wearing a mouthpiece. Let's get to the co-main. We got a title on the line here. Raquel Pennington against Mayra Bueno Silva. Again, this is kind of like finally Amanda Nunes when she steps into the sunlight there. Now we got to get new champions, right? So we're going to have one at the Bantamweight division, potentially 5 rounds, obviously, with this title bout. How do you see it playing out? Raquel Pennington, small dog here, plus $1.36. I'm intrigued because I think Raquel wants to keep it standing, but some experts think she can wrestle with Mayra Bueno Silva. What do you think is the best strategy for the dog here?
she's going to keep it standing for
Yeah.
sure, especially early on as it goes. I don't think she's going to try to implement a wrestling game plan. Maybe as the fight progresses and as she says, she sees Bueno Silva get a little tired, because that's the thing here too. Pennington's been tested. She's been in deeper waters before. We haven't seen that for Bueno Silva. And you want to talk about Du Plessis coming out early and strong. She's another one. She's going to come out aggressive. She is a spark plug. She hits like a truck. She's got the submission and finishing ability as well. But you weather that storm. You get her past round 2. I'm curious to see how she's going to be. I think that's where Pennington can kind of take this fight over. So I would not lay the chalk here, man. I understand. I mean, I think it's a Silva finish or bust, in my opinion. And maybe it's a close, if it goes all the way, maybe it's a competitive split decision type of fight if she can hang in there. But the last few rounds are going to be very interesting. And I think that's where Pennington's going to kind of excel as it goes. So she's tough, underrated historically. She's fought the best of the best and gave them all fits. So I think Pennington, even though, there's some kind of criticism out there, people kind of questioning if she deserves to be here. Look, if you look at her resume and who she's been in there with and some of the wins that she has, she definitely deserves to be in this spot. Yeah,
sometimes they give those Emmys out for Lifetime Achievement Awards. This would be one for Raquel Pennington. She's been there with the very best for many, many years for Dana White, that's for sure. I look at the action man, Chris Curtis, and sometimes the action is lacking if you're backing him as a fave. And he is a fave here against Marc-Andre Barrio. We know that Barrio is going to be the hometown favorite, if you will, against the action man. Do you worry about weighing this big number with Chris Curtis? Now it's up to $1.92.
I gave it out at minus 165 on UFC on the Line. So that's another show you guys should be checking out as well as UFC on the Line on UFC Fight Pass. No, I did. Actually, I'm not to brag, but I went out there and I said, look, this is stealing. If you're getting Curtis at minus 165, I really think it's stealing. And now the line's ballooned up to almost minus 200. I think anything below 200, there's a little bit of value on Chris Curtis. I know what you get in Barriot. He's another aggressive, probably underrated as well. That's going to be a theme for tonight, it seems like, for the show. But I do think that he doesn't have that flashy style, but he's pretty effective. Just styles make fights, and I think Curtis is going to be able to pull away clearly as this fight progresses, wins 2 out of 3 rounds easy, if not get a finish. So I think anything under minus 200, the Curtis side has value.
Mike Malott against Neil Magny. I said it earlier in the program. I feel like poor Neil Magny. We put you in there with killer after killer, but Neil Magny's not having us cry for him. He's like, I'm a big boy. I know what I'm signing up for. Plus 275 here on Neil. Any shot of pulling off an upset? And again, we feed him killers, but he doesn't seem to mind.
He doesn't seem to mind it. He plays spoiler time and time again. So this is the ultimate test for Malott. I mean, Magny at this point is the ultimate gatekeeper. If you could get through Neil Magny, you're on your way to great things. So this is a test for Malott. I think it's a test he can pass. I just think he's too dangerous here in this spot. He could finish Magny on the feet. He could get a takedown and finish him on the ground as well. So he's ultra dangerous, a really good finisher. But this is where it gets a little sketchy. If this fight, again, kind of continues to play out a little bit and Magny can drag this into deep waters, he's the type of fighter that could definitely win on the scorecards or possibly get a late finish, because he will be a test for Malott. There's no question about it. He's been in there with everybody, and he's performed relatively well, pulling off several upsets along the way. So now where the price is almost minus 400, you got to kind of take a deep breath, step back, because I think the value's been extracted, to be honest with you. If you're going to look at the Malott side, you look at finish, because I think that's clearly the way he wins. It's probably not hitting the scorecards if he wins it. So I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, Neil Magny's like a left-handed reliever in baseball, crafty, as they would say. I only have about 30 seconds, Nick. Is there another fight on the card anywhere that you might see some value still here before we get to Saturday?
You know what? Charles Jourdain, baby. Yeah. He's a hometown Canadian. I know Woodson is talented. He's long. He's gifted for sure. But I just think styles make fights again. And Jourdain matches up really good in this spot. I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes Woodson. So, again, another spot where I think under minus 200, you might want to look at the Canadian favorite in Jourdain.
He's still right now under $2. And that's fascinating because, does that fight stay standing? Does it hit the ground? But if it stays standing, it could be an absolute firefight. Hey, Nick, really appreciate you as always, my friend. Continued success, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you, guys.
There he is, everybody. Nick Kalikas. Give him a follow on X at Fight Odds like I do. When we come back, we're going to Washington, D.C. to catch up with Reed Kuhn next here on First Strike. We continue. First strike here on VSiN as we break down UFC 297 north of the border in Toronto. Let's go to Washington, D.C. Catch up with our guy, Reed Kuhn. Follow him on X as I do at Fightnomics. He is the author of a book of the same name. Reed, when it's the first pay-per-view, it's Canada. Do you do anything different for the cuisine?
I don't think so. It's not really a regional cuisine I have in my repertoire. I've been up there. Poutine is good.
Poutine.
But I don't have that in my own cookbook. So
well, what the hell is
poutine?
What is poutine?
It's like French fries and gravy.
Oh, disgusting. Reed, when you look at these fight cards, we talk about it a lot. It's certainly if it's in China or if it's in Brazil, and certainly parts of the United States, you feel like when there's local fighters, sometimes that can influence judging. Certainly Brazil is the one that always comes to mind. A lot of Canadian fighters on the fight card. I know that the metrics, that's not going to necessarily play into it, but how do you use that as a variable? Is it one when we have to take into account, let's say if it hits the cards, that you might get home cooking?
I certainly don't account for it in the model because we're not using location as a predictive variable, but qualitatively, when you're looking at a very close matchup and stylistically, you might be seeing someone who's better at scoring points than necessarily dazzling with a knockout. You might feel a little bit more safe that this guy is going to get the credit on the cards. It's the crowd reaction that is usually the determining variable. It's not the judges themselves. Analysis in soccer has shown that the closer fans are to the field, the more they influence calls that go in one way or the other. It's the noise they make. It's their verbal reaction to a play being made. So I think the same thing is roughly true in MMA. If you have a crowd reacting very strongly to every small jab that lands, it's hard to ignore that. The judge just simply thinks he scored more often. So I get it. I get why people think there might be a little bit of hometown cooking, but really there's a lot of dynamics at work here. It's a pretty fascinating problem.
That is fascinating in the explanation that there's actually the research out there in soccer arenas, how boisterous they are. That is wild. And yeah, we've talked about a lot in the show. It feels like it's almost human nature that it's not the judges that are skewing it themselves. They're being skewed by the reaction of the crowd. So it's almost innate and something that they can't even see happening. The main event, no Canadians in this main event here for Sean Strickland against Dricus Du Plessis. Got the South African against the American here in Sean Strickland. I always talk about with the Johnny Walker fight like last week, it's hard to know what's going through his head. I think you can say the same thing about a Sean Strickland fight. I don't mean that as a knock either. It's just hard to know where he is mentally sometimes. It seems like Dricus has gotten into his head a little bit leading up to this fight. Are the numbers showing that there's a lean one way or the other? Because right now Sean Strickland's up to $1.42 betting favorite here as the defending champ.
There's been a pretty significant amount of price movement, if I'm not mistaken, from Du Plessis all the way to Strickland, and now he's creeping up even further. I initially had the slightest lean on Strickland purely by the numbers. Now he's just a more efficient striker. He lands more often than he takes. He's annoying. He's hard to hit. He frustrates people with that very closed guard style of boxing. And that could be a problem round over round. You would expect him to be scoring as long as he stays on his feet, and his takedown defense is 84%. That's very good. Du Plessis, his takedown offense, 50%, slightly above average maybe, but hasn't been overwhelmingly effective on the ground. He's definitely had stretches where he's gotten a submission or grappled someone, but I don't know how long he can do that. Can he do that in a 5-round fight? I doubt it. I think he's a little too big and muscular to be able to do that for 5 straight rounds. So, yeah, the lean here is Strickland round to round, but Dricus is going to be the threat. I mean, He's the threat to get a knockout. He's the threat to get an early submission. I just think that Strickland is tricky enough to weather that early storm, take it into deeper waters, and just keep point striking and eventually piling up some damage. I mean, the defense on Dricus is not very good. He does get hit, but he counts on a sturdy chin. Rounds 4, rounds 5, that could add up the same way we saw it add up with Adesanya. He just kind of wilted. So, Strickland, it's a slight lean, but knowing the threats on the other side of the cage, it's not going to be a huge bet.
Fascinating. Again, that total right now sitting at 7.5 minutes here at -225 for the over a round and a half. Feels correlated. If you like Strickland, more than likely you'd assume he would take it deeper into the Toronto night. If you like the Du Plessis side, maybe a little bit sooner than later. In the co-main, you got Raquel Pennington here. They're going to have a new champion in this division here now with Amanda Nunes, long since retired Mayra Bueno Silva. A little controversy in her last fight against Holly Holm. Pop for Adderall. I don't know how much we knock her on that after finding what that was. But now she is in a title bout. Pennington's a small dog here, plus $1.36. What are the numbers showing you here?
This is another one that's very close on paper, and it's another one where I'm leaning towards the more frustrating fighter. Pennington is really good at slowing the fight down and scoring more often, but also using her weight appropriately. She clinches very effectively. She holds people against the cage. It stifles their offense while giving the perception that she's in the driver's seat. And she's very good at that game. And surprisingly, she's been able to pull that off even at a very high level. Whereas Silva is the more dangerous one. She's got the submissions. Her striking is a little more aggressive, not quite. But you got to think that if there's a finish here, it's probably on the Silva side. But again, I'm leaning at this high level. I don't expect an early finish, and I think the fight will take a while to develop. And then I think it's Pennington's. It's in her favor the longer this goes because of that control time, that just grinding mentality. So once again, I'm leaning towards the more frustrating fighter, but again, also not going to bet the farm here. I think probably my big bets are going to be earlier on the card.
Let's talk about one of those fights earlier in the card. I can't wait to see Charles Jourdain against Sean Woodson. It could be a firefight. And then there's maybe the proclivity that this fight hits the ground too. But if it stays standing, it seems like it could be electric. What are the numbers showing you here? Because right now, Jourdain's almost a $2 betting favorite.
Yeah, I like Jourdain. He's pretty gifted as a striker. One thing that leaps off the page here is there is a 9-inch reach differential, which I did not expect. I don't think I've seen that in a while. Jourdain and Woodson being much, much rangier, also older, a little bit more damaged, and not quite as good defense. But both guys are very good strikers. And in terms of going to the ground, I don't know if I see that. Woodson has a higher takedown accuracy, but rarely uses it, way below average for the UFC, and Jourdain is even lower. So these guys haven't attempted many takedowns. They're usually playing defense, I think, because they are good strikers. Other people want to get them to the mat. And so this could be a shootout. And so while I think Jourdain is a more gifted natural striker, that reach differential really has me concerned. I mean, that's a big gap to close. So you got to hope that, to our earlier conversation, you would hope that hometown crowd is going to be really verbalizing whenever he does land those strikes and giving him credit for it. I do see him getting the edge. He's just been a little bit more effective. I am a little worried about that reach. Sometimes you see guys enter the cage and it looks like they're in a completely different weight class. It's going to look like that with this matchup.
Yeah, Woodson, he is lanky. He is long, 6'2", at 145 pounds with that 78-inch reach. Let's get to Jazzy J, Jasmine Jasudavicius. She's a big favorite against Priscilla Cachoeira here. But the numbers are bearing that out, that Jazzy should be this big a fave?
Yeah, this is pretty glaring. This is probably the biggest grappling mismatch we have on the card. Jasudavicius, very aggressive with the takedowns, dominates people on the mat. She spends about a third of all her octagon time in control on the mat, whereas Priscilla, takedown defense, average, control time, almost nothing. I see this as a glaring mismatch. Priscilla has also been finished by submission several times, and so you got to think that if you give Jasmine that much control time on the mat, she could eventually find a choke. So, yeah, I agree with her as a heavy favorite here. I don't know if she's going to have to just wrestle this for, 3 rounds or if she's going to get some submission attempts. But she seems like an easy parlay anchor.
I got it before we say goodnight here for this edition of First Strike. Ask you about Neil Magny because, Neil's a fan favorite. He takes on all comers. He's going to do it again against Mike Malott here. Big time underdog. Is there any value here on the dog or should Malott be this big a favorite at 345?
We don't have a whole lot to work with Malott. Only 14 minutes of fight time, although he does meet our criteria as having 3 fights. But I think that, his stats look pretty good. Some a little bit more inflated than others. His knockdown rate, for example, because he has scored 2 knockdowns in limited action, looks pretty amazing. I don't know if he's truly that much of a juggernaut with his hands, or if that's just sample size and the fact that he was fighting lower quality opponents. But Magny has been in there with sluggers before, and he has been one of those guys that's really delivered as a dog many times in the past. I mean, I was riding a wave with him for years. So while he is the underdog here, being a little bit older and more damaged, he's taken 8 knockdowns to date. Magny has. That's a huge liability. You don't want him standing, but he could win this on the mat and, or at least stretch this to a decision. So yes, I think there is some value on the dog play here. I'd like to see where it goes.
I cannot wait to see what's on the menu north of the border when you follow Reed, as I do, on X at Fightnomics. We'll see you next week right here for Strike on VSiN.